Do you yearn for travel that involves outdoor adventure and learning? I do. I also have a passion for all things farming and agriculture. I've traveled to exotic jungles to learn about growing chocolate. I even once owned my own organic vegetable and sunflower farm. And now I'm planning my journey back to agriculture. Agritourism, defined as travel that involves some type of agricultural experience. Agritourism is all about entertaining. But the marketing strategist in me knows that at its core, agritourism is really about educating, and education affects change. My future farm needs to deliver a profound experience to all of its visitors. It needs to educate people about food, health, and climate. Join me to learn from experienced agritourism farmers and entrepreneurs and help me build my future farm strategy. And who knows, maybe one day soon you'll find yourself in a tropical jungle cutting open cacao pods with a machete, or savoring an outdoor plant-to-plate community dinner with 100 guests at a farm in Illinois. So let's tap into the agritourist in you. My conversation with Jim Sanders, farmer from Wildflower Lane Farms in North Carolina, was far-reaching. His idea around having food advocacy groups who are purchasing produce from retailers and wholesalers shift those funds to pay local farmers to grow for them has had a tremendous impact on many nonprofits in the North Carolina area. Another one of the nonprofit organizations that Jim's idea has reached is called PORCH. PORCH fights food insecurity by creating sustainable hunger relief programs at the local level. Started in 2010 in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, PORCH has grown into a repeatable model of monthly neighborhood food drives and fresh produce distribution supplying food pantries, schools, and community programs across the country. PORCH's volunteer network of 50 chapters in 12 states has contributed more than $12 million in hunger relief. PORCH's flagship program called PORCH for Pantries consists of running monthly neighborhood food drives to supply non-perishable goods to local food pantries and families in need. PORCH has now introduced PORCH Fresh, which supplements the non-perishable goods with milk, eggs, meats, fruits, and vegetables, and uses local farms like Jim's to support this need. This is Jen Ross, your Agritourist podcast host. I had the pleasure of speaking with Nora Dicker, the program manager for PORCH Hillsborough, and learning more about how they are connecting and collaborating to impact food security. Enjoy my conversation with Nora. And again, I just want to thank Jim Sanders, as his idea around shifting funds to local farmers to supply local veggies and fruits has had such a far-reaching impact. And I am hopeful that these interviews further impact that reach. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review if you enjoy this podcast.
Good morning. How's it going?
Good morning, Nora. How are you? So you all ready to go? First, why don't you tell me a little bit about you, your title, kind of a little bit of your past and what brought you here, kind of what attracted you to this opportunity. And then I want to go into PORCH communities. And then obviously you are focused on Hillsborough. So I want to understand the bigger organization and how these, I'll call them franchises or how whatever chapters, how they function. And I definitely want to touch on the fresh food aspect, the farming piece, which is how I found out about you through Jim Sanders and Wildflower Lane Farms. That's kind of how this all unfolded because I connected with him and then he connected me with Table and then he connected me with PORCH. So it's kind of, but I think it's important to understand the intersection of all these organizations and how they can effectively help each other thrive and in essence then help the community in a stronger way. So right. That's what the message I'm trying to create here and the opportunity I'm trying to allow farmers and people in the food business to understand and maybe be inspired to do something in their community or tap into some of the organizations like yours that already exist. So Nora, tell me about you.
Absolutely. So my name is Nora Dicker. I am I'm raised in North Carolina, spent most of my life here. I am a social worker. So I got my undergraduate degree in social work from Indiana University, and then came back home, worked for a couple of years, and got my master's degree in social work from North Carolina Central University. I'm still involved with the university. I am the vice president of the Social Work Leadership Advisory Board with the school. I'm very invested in I guess it's important to me to invest in student social workers. I feel like that's a really high level impact because those are the folks who are going out to do social services, work at nonprofits, etc. Previous to coming to Porch Hillsborough, I worked at Meals on Wheels Durham. So that was kind of my
Okay,
first
yeah.
official, yeah, exactly. That was my first official step into working with food insecurity. There wasn't a lot of upward mobility for me at Meals on Wheels, but I was very appreciative of that opportunity. So, about the time that I was starting to look for my next step.
Can I ask you one question about meals? When you were there, what were your observations? And I mean, was this your first opportunity to really see what was going on with food insecurity? And what, if it was, or what was your perspective at that time? What were you taking in? What were you
Mhm.
seeing?
hmm So this was, I would say, probably, yeah, like working within the food insecurity realm. It was my first position. Food insecurity intersects with everything. So in any type of social work, you're going to run into that as a barrier, as a challenge that your clients are experiencing. But that being my first position, focusing on at least trying to help solve that situation, not and necessarily as a preventative, but as, hey, you're hungry, what can we do? So, something that I think my biggest takeaway was that at Meals on Wheels Durham, we offered a discount to those who already received food stamps. So, we have some clients who are getting food paid for by the Department of Social Services in Durham, and they usually have to go through a waiting list to be able to receive that. We have other folks who are able to pay for their own meals. And so I think it was about around like $5 a meal. When you're getting all of that nutritional value, honestly, that's a pretty good deal compared to like a fast food meal, right? So with the discount, it would have brought people's meals to below $4. And so, whenever I would talk to potential clients about that, often what I was hearing back was people were really frustrated with the SNAP program already, which, of course, we know that cuts are coming down to that program even more.
Yep.
So, I had previously worked at a transitional house for men who had been released from prison, and a lot of them signed up for SNAP rewards. This was at the time of COVID, right? So, I'm not sure if there were additional benefits allocated to SNAP. But at that time, I was seeing gentlemen getting SNAP benefits of about $200 a month, which we know, honestly, still even isn't enough. A couple years later, like really only 2 years later, I was working at Meals on Wheels, and seniors were telling me that they were awarded $20 a month. So the program had already been cut back
Oh,
so
wow.
significantly. Right. And I
Wow.
don't know if
I
you've heard of,
can't.
no. It's unacceptable. And I don't know if you have ever looked at an application for SNAP benefits, but it is intensive. It is long. It takes a lot of time. Specifically, working with seniors, they have, technology barriers, vision barriers, all those things. Some of them don't have access to technology, and some of them aren't sure how to use that technology. And so, what I heard back was people stopped applying for the benefit because all they were getting after all of that work was $20, which of course like messes up the evidence, right? Because for evidence based, for our legislators, for our representatives to be able to advocate and say, hey, we really need this, a great piece of evidence is here's all the people that have applied for their benefits, right? But so by cutting down on SNAP benefits already, that is lessening the amount of people who are applying for the benefits, not because they don't need them, but because they don't believe they will get that assistance that they so direly need. And that I feel is my biggest takeaway.
That's a big one. That's huge. How'd that make you feel?
It made me feel really disappointed. I felt like I had gone through like a transition of what I had felt about the SNAP program, because I had seen guys getting around $200. And I was like, okay, that's not terrible for like one person. That's not terrible as a way to get started, right? And so then just to hear a couple years later how drastically it had been cut back down already, because for the most part in the transitional house, yes, they were now going to always have the barrier of having their incarceration history and conviction history, but most of them were young, able-bodied people who were able to work. Now when I was dealing with seniors who most of them worked their whole life paying all of their taxes, and now they are starving. And that just feels like a huge failure on our country in terms of supporting the people who need it most and who also supported our country throughout their whole life.
Hey, it's Jen, your AgriTourist podcast host. I need to interrupt this podcast for a few seconds. I always want to support the people I interview. So if you're planning on visiting the Berkshires this summer and fall season, Dory Schofield, owner of Berkshire Farm Sanctuary and Save a Pet on Long Island, and myself have partnered up to help her create an Agra destination at her sanctuary. We are starting small with 5 exciting chocolate cocktail hours for all of you chocolate lovers out there. You'll start with a chocolate mocktail or a cocktail and indulge in some delicious charcuterie, plant-based of course. Then you will be guided through a chocolate experience and learn how chocolate is made from bean to bar. Savor the tastes of real chocolate from all around the world and depart the farmhouse with some of your favorite chocolate bars in hand. Proceeds support all of Dory's rescued animals at the sanctuary. Remember, there are only 5 dates starting Saturday, July 5th, and once they're booked, that's it. So visit berkshirefarmsanctuary.org or heartbeatfarms.com to register now. Thank you for listening, and I will hand you back over to the podcast. Okay, so talk to me about what happened next with you.
Yeah. So after knowing that it was time for me to make a transition from Meals on Wheels to further expand my experience, I've always been interested in leadership experiences. And so right around that time, Porch Hillsborough was looking for their first employee as a program manager. I was familiar with Porch. I volunteered with my mom when I was younger in high school, in Porch Chapel Hill. And so, and she was involved in Porch Hillsborough as that chapter began to grow and spread its impact there too. So I knew that they were looking for it. So it felt like a really good fit, and thankfully the board thought so too.
I have a question as a younger person while in high school and growing up. What was your impression of Porch and its impact at that time? Like what we, sometimes we did have different impressions when we're younger. We obviously don't know the bigger issues, but at that time, what were you thinking about the organization and what you were involved in at that time?
Yeah, so I only did a couple of things, but it was like a bunch of people, usually parents with their kids, in like, people's garages, right? And we were taking items and putting them in specific bags. And what I learned from doing that, about this specific chapter is they had a really high level of cultural considerations. So Chapel Hill at a time, I believe, was officially designated as a refugee location from people from Burma previously or currently now known as Myanmar. I can't remember which which name
Yeah.
came first, but so there was a high level of people who were not from this country, do not have the same dietary norms that Americans do. And so what Porch Chapel Hill was doing, because that was a location with such a high concentration of those refugees and those families, they began to take into consideration what they would eat, what they wouldn't eat. I could have told you a couple of years ago what some of those considerations were, but that really stood out to me as being a really thoughtful and considerate way to give food, because I feel like, and I didn't know this at the time, but since I've seen so many nonprofits, and this does not only apply to food insecurity, right? But so many groups, so many good ideas and giving get started with people wanting to help, right? Often the people who want to help are not the people who have experienced the challenge that they are trying to address. And so sometimes that means that we are a little off base. Maybe, for example, if we're trying to serve a homeless population, we're like, canned goods, that's awesome. But then you didn't give them any Pop Tops. They don't have a can opener, right? So little things like that, in consideration and perspective from the people you are actually serving is extremely important because you can create harm otherwise. So when
Right.
I was there at Porch Chapel Hill, that let me know that they had to have communications with the people that they were serving so that they could learn, oh, this type of food doesn't really work for me. Oh, this is this. And so that was something that really stood out to me in the beginning of volunteering with Porch Chapel Hill.
So tell me about how Porch started. Give me the history and how it started, and then we'll lead into your role there and all the programs that you do.
Sure. Yeah. So Porch actually started with the Chapel Hill Carborough chapter. So when I was there as a high schooler, that was kind of in the very beginnings. So our current CEO of Porch Communities, Christine Cotton, she was part of the founding team. And so the story that she tells is when she had one of her sons who was in school and he had started asking, can I have like an extra sandwich at lunch or whatever? And she was like, okay, great, he's growing. But actually, it turns out that he was giving his extra sandwich to his friend who often came to school without food and without money to buy lunch.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so, yeah, right. So
That's
thankful for
impactful.
young people like that, right? And so that experience of Christine learning what her son was doing really let her know, okay, like there's a serious need here, and we can't depend on our children to be the ones to identify these things. So that's really how it began to grow, and it really started very like small with people's neighborhoods. So the main porch model is for people to get in correspondence, get connected to their porch chapter. They'll receive emails or some type of notification from their neighborhood, because we have volunteers placed in that are representing their neighborhoods as neighborhood coordinators. And they'll be like, hey, we're picking up non perishables on this day. Please put them out on your porch. Hence the name. And so then that neighborhood coordinator would drive around their neighborhood, knowing the houses that were going to have stuff out there, picking up those non perishables, and then taking them to support their local food pantry. So that is like the basic model that every single chapter follows. Chapters then have as they grow, they can include other programs such as Porch Fresh, which I know we'll talk a little bit more about later, or working through partnerships with schools directly as opposed to just supporting the pantries. So as other chapters began to develop, such as Porch Hillsborough, Porch Wake, Porch Durham, in other states as well.
Yeah, it says you have 50 chapters in 12 states.
Yeah, and that is
Wow.
constantly growing.
Okay.
So some of those chapters are as small as one neighborhood coordinator coordinating with one neighborhood and going to a pantry. But we know that that makes a difference regardless, because now that is a avenue of food that the food pantry can depend on. They don't have to apply for grants. They're not having to do any extra reporting work or documentation. It's food they can depend on with no ties, with no work on in terms of the food pantry, which is a really big deal. And so some of those chapters that are so small, like the ones that are just one neighborhood, they might need some assistance with that overhead. And so I believe that's how Porch Communities really began to develop into the organization that it is, right? So Porch Hillsborough, we have a working board. We have me as a program manager. Porch Chapel Hill has an executive director, a program manager, and I believe some other like part-time positions. So there are variances. So Porch Communities might not be helping us as much with the overhead, but they're really assisting those smaller ones. And they provide us with things like helping with like fundraisers, branding, like all those type of things. They'll help us with our materials, our swag, any guidance and things like that as well.
Tell me, okay, so when you first came into the organization, tell me a little bit about that experience. Like, what was surprising to you as far as maybe the needs? Tell me also about how long have you been with the organization?
Actually, less than a year. I came on in
Okay.
June of this year.
Have you seen, obviously, there's a lot that's happened over the last year. So, have you witnessed any trends on the need and the type of need that's happening right now? I know when I talk to a lot of organizations, there's been different trends that they're seeing. Obviously, some of their waiting lists are increasing rapidly, which is scary. But just give me your experience so far to date. I know it's obviously been a shorter experience, but you've had history. You've seen also this organization evolve over time, even, as a young adult, so give me your perspective on that.
Yeah, so Porch Hillsborough initially started more so with that like typical porch to pantry design, right? And then when COVID happened, we wanted to do more. And so then they just started to do distributions within the community. So currently we have 7 distributions that we do around the community, serving in total about 600 families every month. So roughly
Wow.
2,000 individuals. Yeah. So I'm really happy to see that we have that wide of impact, but our services are monthly. So at best, maybe somebody is going to 2 of the distributions. We have one that's completely open to the public. We serve about 200 families there every month. We have others that maybe are supposed to be by word of mouth for a particular neighborhood, or we've gotten in contact with school social workers at some of our schools with the highest rate of economically disadvantaged students, which that is determined by who's receiving free or reduced lunches or receiving other types of assistance. So it's a pretty easy, like the student economically disadvantaged rate is essentially the rate of students who are food insecure
Right.
because of the data that they're getting that from. And so we reached out to the schools in Orange County School District that had the highest 3 rates, which is about like 68% of the students are economically disadvantaged. And so we do small distributions there with a list of folks we get from the school social workers. So on top of supporting the pantry. So I think my biggest impression coming on as program manager was that we do a lot of little things. There's a lot of coordinating needed to be done to be able to make sure that all the food's going to the right place, it arrives at the right time because we have no physical location. So when
Okay.
we distribute food as soon as it gets to us that day. And so we do partnerships with the food bank, with Farmer Food Share in Durham. And so they deliver us those foods the day of at the time we need for those distributions.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a lot of scheduling on my part. And so a lot of it moves smoothly because it's partnerships that we've worked with. And then in terms of your question about trends that we have seen, sometimes that can be hard for us to measure. There are some months where we do have to turn people away from the distribution because we have run out of food. But I will say that that is pretty rare. Preemptively, we have been trying to add a little bit of things here and there to see if we can stretch out things a little bit more. Sometimes the weather also really impacts us because our distributions are all during the week and they're all in the morning. So that's definitely a barrier for some folks getting to work. So sometimes we've seen, when it's been below freezing, at some of our distributions, people are showing up at 6 o'clock in the morning, sleeping in their cars for a little bit to ensure that they have a good space because it's a drive-through
Yeah.
distribution. I believe that there's a lot of fear and concern going on right now. So, when I have had the chance to speak to some of our recipients in the line, there is often some tension. People are very, very friendly, but of course, it's tension because they want to make sure they're getting their food and everything's like that. And at this time, though there's that grant funding freeze and federal funds freeze and everything like that, for many organizations, as far as I have heard, that is not necessarily putting a hard stop on the services that they are doing right now. There is so much uncertainty, and some of the grant funds that are being frozen, some of those have already been allocated. And so some of those programs are still able to continue. So I think what's really, really difficult right now, and in part, I feel that that might be on purpose, is that we are not able to make hard, concrete decisions about what is needed to be done to ensure our sustainability, other nonprofit sustainability, because we simply do not know what is going on. These things are being frozen, or it's being deemed illegal by a judge, but who knows what's going to happen,
Right.
right? So
Right.
that uncertainty is extremely difficult for nonprofits to work with. So yes, like Porch Hillsborough, we revisited our budget, was like, if we lose this funding, which is not even funding that we directly receive, but funding that our partners receive.
Right. We see that's what I've noticed too, that it like even one of the organizations actually in Massachusetts that I spoke with, they're a farm. A lot of their funding is not from grants. They have a small portion, but they're more concerned about they get a lot of donors and stuff like that. And they're concerned that those donors now are going to have to donate more money to organizations that are losing their grants and may not come to them. So it's this reciprocal effect. And that's what they're concerned. So what portion of your funding comes from grants per se versus other sources?
Mhm. So our direct funding, it does not really rely on federal grants in
Good.
that way, but we rely on our partnerships who are
Yeah.
able to give us food for free or at a very low cost.
Yes.
And the way that they are doing that is mostly through USDA grants. And so we know in North Carolina, let me just pull my stats up. In North Carolina alone, there's about an $11 million loss in North Carolina. And for us specifically, that's about $65,000 of food that would be cut for us. So, we went back to our drawing board and figured out what we could do to make sure that we are able to sustain if we truly do not get that money, because we are in the in between. Our grant partners, like the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina, they have expressed wanting to hold that commitment to us. But again, in all of this uncertainty, we don't feel that we can depend on that necessarily
Absolutely.
anymore. And so that's again the difficult part of the uncertainty, is that even those organizations like us who don't depend directly on grant funding, our partners do. They don't know what's going on. They don't know if they're going to be able to continue things. So they can't tell us or any other nonprofits exactly what's going on. And that is extremely difficult for moving forward and possibly trying to figure out what more can we do. If we don't know what we're losing, we don't know what more we can
Right.
do, but we know this need is going to go up.
Yeah. You know, although this is a very turbulent time as far as knowing, I think in a positive way, it's a really good exercise for all of us to go through to really think out of the box and think creatively about different ways, to meet the needs, because this can happen at any time. It's not just what's going on now. It could happen at any time for any reason. So it stinks, but at the same time, I really think it's time for us to stretch our creative abilities and figuring out different ways to meet the needs. So tell me more about Porch Fresh. Is that okay, that's the name of the program. Tell me more about that, and then how a farm can contribute to that. So give me that perspective.
Yeah, definitely. So Porch Fresh was an additional program added on to Porch chapters after we have been doing the non-perishables. Unfortunately, non-perishables are not always the most healthy, right? Pretty high in sodium and other things like that. So Porch Fresh came about to kind of with the idea of like, okay, we don't want to just make sure we're feeding folks. We want to make sure we're helping them get nutrition value into their bodies and families as well, right? So Porch Fresh is basically just that, adding the distribution or allocation of fresh food. So that would include vegetables, fruits, protein, and eggs. That's specifically for Port Hillsborough. That is what we distribute. So we do that a couple of different ways. So we get some of our fresh items from the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina for two of our bigger distributions. And so that comes in like pallets of things. And then, and we typically get like 3 to 4 fresh items in a bunch, and sometimes with like bread as well, but like 3 to 4 vegetable slash fruit items. And then for our other smaller distributions, we partner with Farmer Food Share, which is located in Durham, or we use the Durham location. And they actually are in connection directly with farmers. So they pick up the items, bring them to their warehouse, have volunteers pack boxes that will have a variety of items within them. And so then they deliver those as well. And we actually get boxes from Farmer Food Share that include fresh eggs too, which is
So,
great.
so are they paying the farmers for that produce, or is that donations from the farms?
I am not extremely sure, but I do not believe that they are just donations. The volume of the items and the quality of the items is just too high for me to think that it is all donations. I really do believe that they have to be supporting the farmers that are doing this
Okay.
financially.
Yeah, I
Um,
know a lot of the organizations are. I was just curious. I think they are as well, which is again a win-win for both the farmer and the recipient. So, that's what I know a lot of people, and that's what I know Jim Sanders is involved in all his interactions. So I think it's such a win-win for the community at large. So you've been, when did you launch that piece of the program?
Let me see. So I can say specifically for Porch Hillsborough, when we added Porch Fresh, so let me just in 2022 is when we
Okay.
started to include Porch Fresh. And I really do believe that must have come from the distributions that we began to do because we didn't even do those before 2020. So I think it's as recent as, 3 years ago. And then just to kind of go again to your part about how it's really like a great program that we're supporting our local American and for the most part in Farmer Food Share's case, North Carolinian farmers that is also then supporting people who are in need. I mean, that's the thing that these programs are getting cut is like they're totally missing. It's like you are thinking that people are waste, fraud, and abuse on terms of who's receiving these benefits, but you're not even thinking about who's providing these benefits.
Right.
The same thing with cutting the SNAP program is the same thing with cutting USAID. Both of those programs seriously support our local farmers, and they are seriously being harmed by those cuts. So it is great when nonprofits are able to kind of be that bridge. The farmers feel good because, of course, it's helping them with their livelihood, but then they also feel really good about where that food is going. Um, so Farmer Food Share provides beautiful produce to us that comes in boxes. So it's a much quicker distribution because we're just giving one thing
Right.
to families, right? And like I said, those boxes now include eggs, so that's wonderful for us. They seem to have not had any supply problems with that, which has been really great. And then we also purchase items of protein. So we do support local farmers. We support a couple, I would say maybe like 5 to 6 local farmers. We try our best to get them on a rotation. Many of them are able to, due to the high level in volume, I would say that we order because, we're serving 600 families a month. And so it seems that that could be part of the reason they're able to give us a slightly better deal than maybe if they were going into retail or things like that. And so we're really happy to be able to support local farmers that way as well. But that's certainly something that we are searching for additional funding to make sure that we're able to continue to do so because it is just that little bit more expensive than the store, but it's organic, the quality, and you're benefiting your local community
Right.
in an additional way. And so that again is really wonderful. That's how I know that the farmers really do enjoy being able to provide what they're creating, their livelihood, their products to a nonprofit because they feel like they're able to do something good for their community that way as well.
And I know it happened in 2022. How has it been received? One thing I noticed, I worked with a farm for 10 years that donated food to food pantries. It was everything was grown organically. We were a small farm in essence, but everything was delivered on the day it was harvested. One of the challenges that we noticed was people didn't always know what to do with certain vegetables. Like you were saying, depending on who they are, where they're from, they may not be familiar with certain vegetables, may prefer certain ones that you're not growing, and they may not have the tools. Like you said, with the can opener, they may not have an oven or the pots and pans necessary to cook some of these things. So how was it received, and how do you manage that piece of it? Do you provide recipes? Do you, like, is there any education component that needs to go along with some of this? Because sometimes we think like, oh, just you give food to people, they'll know what to do, but they don't always have the means or the knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question. And that also leads me to share another partnership that we work with, similar to Jim with Wildflower Lane Farms. We have a partnership with the Hillsborough Community Garden, and they pretty much grow exclusively for porch. So everything that they're
Oh,
growing,
nice.
everything the volunteers are working for, they are providing to Porch. So they will drop off, when in season, they'll come to those distributions and drop us off produce for every distribution. Of course, maybe that's not for some of the distributions, it might not last all 200 families, but for our smaller ones, it really does. And
Yep.
no matter what, it bulks up what we're giving for those families who do receive it.
Yep.
And so we have had the instance where there's been some things that the Hillsborough Community Garden volunteers wanted to grow and that we gave out to our clients. And they were like, what is this? And that happened to me. I had never seen an Asian green eggplant before this summer. Well, I had
No, it happens to all of us. I mean,
that.
people go to the grocery store and they see the same types of vegetables and the same colors of vegetables. And when you see some of the things that come out of farms, it's surprising, and it's enlightening, but you really do need to teach people.
So I know in years past, because this is going to be going on our third year working with them, we have had to go back and be like, hey, let's maybe try to think of like more kids friendly things, right? Carrots, cherry
It's
tomato,
important. Yep.
and things like that. So they've been very, very receptive to our feedback. And then we did do a survey at one of our locations in partnership with a project for a UNC student, specifically on Porch Fresh. And so one of the questions that we asked to kind of help us with this knowledge is, what's your favorite fruit or vegetable, right? Like, what is your favorite item of produce? And so I've got like a whole little word like cloud. And so I provided that to Hillsborough Community Garden. I was like, the bigger the word, the more people said it, you probably want to stick to this list. And so they said that was really helpful as well. And so some of those things were like I said, tomato, carrots, broccoli, potato. We're in the South, so people said collards. So that was really helpful for us to get that input. And then I did another survey where I piloted a small one last month, and I was asking, what's your favorite, what's the most important part of what you're receiving, right? Is it the meat? Is it the eggs? Is it the produce? Is it the non-perishables? And pretty much everybody listed a fresh item. So I do believe that the Porch Fresh is super impactful. Of course, the non-perishables are good. Don't get me wrong. But fresh is something that you might not be getting from other food pantry or something like that. And then we also asked in the Porch Fresh survey just to help us understand like how the amount of fruits or vegetables has changed since people have began receiving porch. So we asked if it decreased, if it increased, if it stayed the same, and nobody said that their intake decreased. So that at least let us know that we're at least maintaining what they were already providing for themselves at a lower cost for them, or we're increasing. And the vast majority of folks said that we were increasing the amount of fresh fruits and vegetables that they were eating.
That's great. That's great. And it's good you're doing those surveys to really keep in touch with your customer, who you're serving. Because a lot of people don't, like you said, there's sometimes that you know, people want to give, but they really need to understand the needs of their audience and who they're serving. It's
Yeah.
really important. It's
Yeah, I
really
was gonna say,
important.
often people's hearts are in the right place, but sometimes we want to help in the way that feels best or maybe easiest or most logical to us. But if we haven't been in the situation, we need to really lean on somebody else's expertise.
So putting, let's just put money aside. What do you think, like if you were to like if you wanted to really grow this and expand this, where do you think the focus would be on? What would the focus be on?
So that is actually something that we are talking pretty in depth with the board to really develop our new strategic plan. So we know what we want to do. We know for this year we're very much focused on maintaining and sustaining. But some things that we've talked about in terms of like what are our longer year focus could do with addressing certain barriers. Like I said, all of our distributions are during the workday or right before a workday.
Yeah.
It could be a barrier. It's also like a barrier for us to get some volunteers. So maybe we want to do like an evening or weekend. Everybody who attends our distributions typically need to have a form of transportation because they're drive up distributions. So, is there a way we can address that? Do we want to follow in the footsteps of Porch Chapel Hill Carborough and open up our own food pantry? So there are a couple different directions that we are very much talking about right now. But for this year, we'll simply be focusing on maintaining and trying to sustain what we're doing.
And personally, it's been a year, so what have you taken away personally from this year, whether it's an interaction with someone that was impactful or just, an observation that you've made that you may not have come in with that perspective and are coming, out with a slightly different perspective on something. And especially as a social worker, there's the emotional side. There's, Nora and what am I feeling? And then there's the social worker also who, from a professional perspective, you might be taking in something as well. So
Yeah, no, that's a great question. This position is my first position where I have very, very, very limited action or interaction with the clients or recipients that I'm serving. So, of course, at Meals on Wheels, everybody is at their own house. That's the whole thing.
right.
But I was talking to them on the phone every day, right? All the time. So I was still directly interacting with the clients. Now with Port Hillsborough, I'm more so focused on making sure that everything is in the right place. I'm doing a little bit of everything. And so our volunteers are really the folks who are interacting directly with our recipients. So I think something that I've learned is one, how to continue to advocate for our recipients when I'm not having that direct interaction with them. And again, that's why I've been sharing so much about making sure you've got the right people on your team who can serve as maybe liaisons or focus groups or doing your surveys, things like that. But then I've also been learning a lot about what motivates volunteers, why they want to continue, why they start, what would make a volunteer experience feel uh, the best to them and things like that. So I think that I've been taking more away from the organizational structure as opposed to in terms of shifting my focus from that direct interaction with clients to making sure that us as a whole organization and that all of our programs are working together to fit the need and mission that we follow.
And that what you just said is really important because using your skills to really understand what motivates a volunteer, how to sustain that motivation, because people come in excited and they want to help. And then how do you sustain that excitement and momentum and keep them interested and keep them feeling like they're empowered and that that purpose is still there and they feel important? That's not easy. That's probably one of your toughest parts of your job. What have you gleaned from that? Because that's probably something that you can really learn to do that and be, that's something that could be replicated in anything. But I find that to be so important when I work with volunteers, even is really trying to empower them and make them wanting to come back and wanting to stay involved. The sustenance, the sustainability is really key there.
Yeah. So first off, I've got to give a big shout out to the Port Hillsborough volunteer team because I am the only person who is getting paid for working for Port Hillsborough. Our board, all of our volunteers, they're doing this out of the kindness of their heart and their dedication to the community. So they are amazing, and we would not be doing it without them. And then
Yep.
the other thing is that Porch, all Porch chapters follow that grassroots model. So it really is people talking to their neighbors, people talking to people they already know. And that type of kind of word of mouth and connectivity, it's bringing in people who are already connected with their community or want to be connected with their community more. So that brings a certain level of dedication already in the mind of the volunteer for this type of work. The other thing that I would say is that everybody likes to have fun. So anyway, and like I think that sounds so simple, but like how often have you gone to a club or a group presentation and they have such an amazing, amazing mission and you want to do the work, but in reality, you're just like not connecting with the people very much. It's not a lot of laughter going on. It feels very serious, which of course, like the work that we're doing is very serious, but people still like to laugh. And
Yep.
so I feel like bringing in that aspect of enjoyment is really important to volunteer experiences. So, like, our volunteers use the working at the distribution as a time to like chat and catch up with their friends. We're all smiles and like goofing around a little bit. And so it's a really nice energy and experience for the volunteers that I mean, they're out there in below freezing temperatures before the sun is up. They'll be out there in the rain. And so I think having a way for volunteers to remain connected to each other, whether it's just like our monthly emails so they can kind of do reoccurring things so that they can really connect. So, like, as opposed to a volunteer position that's going to be like data entry, which don't get me wrong, that's super, super, super important. But you might want to find a volunteer who like likes that stuff, right? Or looking for something where they can kind of like shut their brain off and just do work, right? But for others, they're looking for a way to get to know people in the area, maybe even making friends, as well as doing the mission for the organization that they're volunteering for. So I think it sounds pretty simple, but I believe that amusement and enjoyment is really important to get people to continue to come back.
And it sounds simple, but people don't always like they don't always do that. so like it might be a simple statement, but it's such an important statement. So thank you for saying that because it often gets overlooked, the simplicity of that. But it's so important. We need to bring some more laughter and smiles and just kind-heartedness and lightheartedness to the serious things that we're doing, especially what you're doing for your organization, and the issue that you're addressing is very serious. People in the situation that are in need, I mean, this is serious, they don't have food. So, but you need to bring that lightheartedness to what you guys are, how you're executing it and stuff.
And the recipients feel it too, right? So in terms of volunteerism, if the volunteers are interacting directly with the clients or recipients, you definitely want them to be having a good time because
Yeah.
if they're not, they're gonna unfortunately displace that energy, or it's a lack of positive energy that the client is receiving.
Yep.
And especially when they're like their first interaction with the program, even if it's just as quick as putting something in somebody's car, like if they don't feel warmth and they're already going to be feeling bad about needing the help in the first place. So if they don't feel warmth from the people they're receiving any type of assistance from, that's a really big deal. You don't want to scare off your clientele either.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Excellent. Just one more thing. So you said you're still very involved in the university, dealing with young, up and coming social workers. So, how are you bringing this role into that?
Yeah. So let's see, last week or 2 weeks ago, I went and did a presentation for a master's levels class, just not just about Porch, but sharing my trajectory as a student, my experiences, my tips for them while they're still in school, but then also to share about my role as a program manager. Often in the master's levels programs of social work, most of the students are going to go to clinical licensure where they're working with or like able to be your therapist, eventually maybe your psychiatrist as well. And I was never interested in that. And so I didn't feel like there was a ton of other roles that I was educated on about what I could do as a social worker. So that's why they kind of brought me on as a program manager. It was for a class focusing on a more macro scope of impact. And so I talked about Porch there. Tomorrow, I'll be going to a all-day event at Central as well, representing Porch so that students that are either in their bachelor's or master's level will be able to go around, look at tables, look at these different organizations, learn about them, get connected with them, and possibly make connections for their internships because we have required internships for both bachelor's and master's levels programs. You get credit for it, which is cool, but it is required.
I think that's great. I mean, you're opening the eyes of up and coming professionals. The traditional tracks that people went down in some of these careers, they're needed, but I think it's really good for people to open their eyes to all the different opportunities that could exist or create their own. Thank you, Nora. It's a pleasure speaking with you, and you definitely have a lot to offer this organization and the people you're serving, and just keep doing what you're doing. I know you guys will get through this time period and come up with other ways to figure out how to move forward. Congratulations.
Thank you, Jen. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for thinking of us. Thank you, Jim, for the shout out.
Yes.
And just keep up the work too.
Excellent. Okay, Nora, have a great day.
You too. Bye, Jen.
Bye. I hope our AgriTourist podcast prompts you to think more about where your food comes from, whether it be your vegetables, fruits, meats, and even those sweet treats. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with someone you think may truly benefit from or be inspired by it. Visit us at agra-tourist.com. Until next time. So I was recently listening to one of the Grounded in Maine podcasts produced by Amy Fagan. The podcast is an open conversation about being mindful about how we show up in the world. It's focused on sustainability and how sustainability impacts every part of our life. What are some of the most important takeaways that people will get from your podcast?
One of the things that I hope that people will take away from the podcast is encouragement. Like, I want them to not feel like you have to spend thousands of dollars to be part of the solution, because, there are a lot of sustainable, things that say sustainability or sustainable, like solar panels or organic cotton and stuff like that. Like, some things are just more expensive because they have that tagline, that phrase or whatever. But there are so many ways that you can be sustainable. You just have to be a little bit creative. And so I'm putting out all these ideas that what people are doing, just to put the thought out there that we can all be part of it without going broke.
So how can people find your podcast?
My podcast is wherever podcasts are found. It is just called Grounded in Maine. I also have my Instagram is where I am most active, and the Instagram handle is Grounded in Maine Podcasts.